Hi, I'm Gail Banack.
And I'm Ilana Santone. Welcome to the She Means Business podcast. Throughout our careers, we faced countless questions and sought advice from other women we respect and admire. And that's exactly what this show is about.
Each week, we aim to help you achieve your goals by sharing our experiences and talking with successful leaders, offering real stories, practical advice, and actionable takeaways for women who mean business. All right, let's do this. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the She Means Business podcast. We are so thrilled to welcome the creative and talented powerhouse, Kate McKenna, today. Kate is a Canadian Screen Award-winning producer and broadcaster, currently working on CTV's national daytime talk series, The Social. She also created and hosted the show's 5-part digital series, Mom Life Crisis, which if you haven't seen yet, please go check it out on YouTube. It's very powerful and moving, and you will love it. She made regular appearances on CTV's Your Morning and the CFL on TSN, and has writing credits with Today's Parent, the CFL, and CBC Sports, among many others. She's also a media coach, freelance speechwriter, and is a mom of 2 young kids. Welcome to the show, Kate. We're so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your pod, so I'm honored to be here.
So happy to have you on. Wow. Okay. So you've done a lot. You're doing a lot. Not sure how you fit it all in, but that's how we do it. That's how we roll. We love hearing about journeys as well as kind of where you're at. So can you please take us through how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, it's a long, winding journey, man. I thought I was going to be a teacher, and I got accepted to the Queen's Concurrent Education Program out of high school. So at that point, I was set. I was going to do my undergrad at Queen's, which I did. I went to the 5th year of teachers college, went and taught in Italy for a few months. And at that moment, just couldn't imagine myself being in a classroom at that point in time. I think I was 21 when I finished. And I thought, what else could I do that involves, the skills that I have, storytelling, writing. And I thought, well, public relations sounds interesting. So I did a postgrad in PR. And you'd think by then I would have thought, like, this is my track. And yet I remember telling my mom, like, no, I think I want to be a producer. And she's a broadcaster. And she said, Kate, do you even know what a producer does? And I said, no, I actually don't. But I think there's reading and writing and it sounds great. And, at that point, I think her prerogative for me was pay off those student loans, figure it out, but pay off those loans. And so I worked my butt off, and I was working with the Toronto Raptors in some capacity. I was working with Ontario University Athletics. And then the Hamilton Tiger Cats put out an opportunity for someone who wanted to come and work unpaid, back when it was kosher to offer that opportunity to people. And I worked there for the better part of a year. And the amazing part about that job was that it forced me to become a jack of all trades. So I was editing my own stuff, writing my own stuff, doing social media. I was on cam interviewing players. At quarter breaks and halftime, I was out on the field with a microphone. Hey fans, welcome to Iverwin Stadium, et cetera, et cetera. So it was great on so many levels. Then I thought, well, I still don't know what I'm going to do. And Transat Holidays did this nationwide PR stunt. And it was called Vacationer Wanted, and they were trying to find a professional vacationer. So at this point, my mom is like losing her mind. She's like, you're going to apply to be a professional vacationer. I said, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I ended up winning. I was the English Canada winner. And so for a year, my full-time gig was to travel to different resort destinations. And again, it was just me. So there was a French Canadian winner. But in terms of, the content output, I was writing, I was shooting, I was editing, I was on camera reviewing these resorts. But I'm someone who's always thinking 2 sort of lily pads ahead, as I like to say. So even when I was doing that job, the weeks I was home during the year, I was interning at TSN. So doing anything and everything. And then when the vacationer gig ended, I got a job writing at CBC Sports. And that was awesome. And then an opportunity with the CFL Digital came up, and they said, Kate, and I swear I've had the weirdest jobs ever. They said, Kate, we're sending a train across Canada for the 100th Grey Cup for 70 days. Do you want to be on it? And at that moment, it was an interesting juncture because CBC is sort of this, revered broadcasting corporation in this country. But CFL was a digital role, and I thought, maybe if I get in with them, I can get on with TSN because they're the broadcaster. And so I took a bit of a leap, went over to CFL.ca to produce content for them. And sure enough, TSN said, well, you're going to have her on the train for 70 days? Well, she can just do hits for us at SportsCenter. And so long story short, that turned into a gig that lasted 6 years with TSN covering the CFL. And in addition to that, about 1 year in, I was looking for a different sort of opportunity because the CFL stuff was primarily on game nights only. And I saw an internal job posting for The Social, which is a national daytime talk show here in Canada. It's kind of like The View for anyone who's not familiar. It's our version of it. And I really was excited about the opportunity to produce full time. I pitched myself as someone who could also be on air because that's always sort of been my thing, is my ability to do multiple things. I love the idea of working with women after working with men so often at a sports network. And so I've been at The Social now for 12 years. As a segment producer, senior segment producer, now a producer. I also co-host the show bi-weekly now, so I contribute on air there. And that's where I'm at. That's sort of the synopsis of my very weird career journey to date.
Well, we love windy careers, as we like to call it, in a space that we're not really used to. So it's really interesting to hear your story. So you played a lot of different roles. I love this attitude of just doing everything, becoming a jack of all trades so that you can be whatever you want to be in the future. Talk to us a little bit about The Social. What are you most passionate about on The Social?
I think what I'm most passionate about is the team, the machine that it takes to get that show on the air each day. If you're watching, you have no idea. And that's by design. We don't want you to see how much work goes into it because it should look easy. But what I love is every single day you have 30, 40 people who are the best in the country at what they do, whether that's floor directors, editors, producers, hosts. So many people I'm not even naming come together to figure out what we're going to put on air. And the really unique thing about The Social is programming what we're going to talk about. I always say, like, a news program knows what they're going to lead with. Sports highlight show, they know what the stories of the day are. Same with entertainment shows. The thing about The Social is we tackle everything. I always say to guests who want to come on in a co-host or guest chair capacity, as we call it, you have to be able to, on the same day, talk about nuanced topics, maybe some politics, some topics surrounding race and sexuality, and you also have to be able to talk about like sex positions and flirting. And so each day we have to figure out, what do Canadians want to hear? Edutainment is a word that gets thrown around, I think, to describe the type of stuff that we do, because you want to make smart content. And I really do, I pride myself on the fact that I do think we create really smart content, but we also give people a break. And we've heard from so many people that we provide them a bit of respite, especially this year and in past years when the news has felt really difficult. So for me, I'm most proud of being part of the leadership who decides what those contents are going to be, who plays a big role in those morning meetings. I love that. That's what I would say I'm most proud of, because I don't think most people realize that the topics we talk about are decided upon that morning. So we go live at 1 o'clock.
That's crazy.
We haven't figured out the topics until we wrap up that morning meeting at 10:30, 10:45. So credit to the hosts too, who only have an hour and a half or two to really figure out how to come up with their opinions and then how they're going to deliver them in a factual way, but also in a really entertaining way.
It's so fascinating the way you describe it, because in a little intro before we came on air, you were talking about how so different, but it's actually not that different in terms of, you work on a team, you have a leadership role, you're thinking on the spot. And I know one of the things you do on the side is some media coaching. I always say, or often say, that a lot of what we do in the workplace is about how you show up. And I think you're talking about your hosts and how they prepare and then they show up, just 2.5 hours later. And I know, no matter what you're doing, from a career perspective or even personal life, you have that kind of challenge on how do you show up on a day-to-day basis? So I'm curious on your thoughts on that. How do you coach people to show up the way they want to, based on kind of your experiences, but also how they have to show up in their workplace?
I think the biggest thing is knowing how you want to show up. I don't think people give enough critical thought to how they want to be perceived. And so that's a big part of it. I often say to people, go back to your friends, your family, your board of directors, as Michelle Obama likes to call it about her closest group of women. Ask them, what is my thing? And part of this is really a personal branding exercise. What is my thing? What do people say about me? When I walk in a room and then I leave that room, what are people left saying about me? And I think knowing that is half the battle, because that then leads you to be able to show up authentically. And that's one of the things I always say to people, whether I'm doing media coaching or whether I'm coaching people who want to be on television or on our show. People can smell lack of authenticity from a mile away. They can. And so the best part is to figure out who you are, own who you are, and show up confidently as that person. And sometimes the differences that you're so worried about and worried about masking are actually your superpower. I mean, my husband's in broadcasting as well, and he's a journalist, he's Black, and he works a lot with young BIPOC aspiring journalists. And he always says to them, your difference is your superpower. Lean into that.
Oh my God, I love that. Okay, so there are few things that can be more stressful than being live on TV. So you've mastered that, which I feel like, okay, we have a thing or two to learn from you, but we want to do something a little bit different and kind of keep it a bit challenging for you, keep you on your toes. So we're going to do a few rapid fire questions and scenarios that we want your quick take on, okay? So writing a great speech, 3 quick thoughts or rules to go by.
Don't wing it. Most of us are not Barack Obama. Most of us are not excellent speakers. We have to work at it. So don't wing it. And when you're practicing, practice out loud. I once had a veteran broadcaster say to me when he saw me sort of going through my notes in my head, he said, your brain needs to hear your mouth saying it in order to help you memorize. So practice out loud. Hook them at the start and tie up a bow at the end. So I'm a big believer in pattern interruptions. So if you go to start a speech and you start the way everyone in that room expects you to start, hi, everyone, I'm Kate. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you so much for so-and-so for inviting me. I start to glaze over. Whereas if I step up to that podium and I say, I'm going to start with a story, all of a sudden, people perk up. And you can get to the housekeeping stuff later. It's not that you shouldn't thank people, but you can get to that. And then at the end, figure out how you tie it up with a bow. You want to create that full circle moment. Then the other 2 things that I think are really important here are stories. Stories are the ultimate tool of persuasion. And people remember them in a way they do not remember stats and numbers. And one of the things I do on my phone, just in my notes app, is I keep a story bank. Because sometimes when you're under pressure and you have to create a speech, half the battle is figuring out what stories you're going to tell. So, Gail, I was thinking about you because, as I say, I listen to this podcast and I'm a fan. And one of the stories that stuck out to me that you have shared is encouraging a junior colleague to pull a seat up to the table. So in that moment, if I were you, I would have pulled out my phone and jotted that down so that when you have to give a speech, it's already there. So that's a big one for me. And then finally asking yourself, could this speech be shorter? Speeches don't suffer because there's too little in them. They suffer because there's too much. TED Talks are 18 minutes long for a reason. It's really hard work paying attention. So I think the shorter you can keep it, the better. And I always think of my English teacher who in grade 11, he always said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. And I think of that a lot.
I think it's unknown if Shakespeare came up with that saying or somebody just assigned it to Shakespeare, but I love that. Wow. Those are gold. Oh my God, Kate. Okay. Second, making a good first impression. What are key success factors?
I mean, I think the physical stuff goes without saying. So a firm handshake, eye contact, posture, considering your wardrobe. You don't want to look sloppy. But also, I'm a big believer in preparedness. If you're going into a new setting, you know what questions you're going to be asked. Tell us a bit about yourself. What brings you to this company? Prepare an answer. Don't wing it. And also, I like to say, read the room before you get in the room. Research the company culture. You presumably have a network. Maybe you interviewed with someone who you can do a bit of a pre-phone call with first. That will help you with so many things in terms of knowing how to dress, what the vibe is. Is it a casual office where you can kind of crack jokes and talk about outside life, or is it more formal? And one of the things I was sharing with him is find your ally early. So if you know someone, and oftentimes I find people who work in admin are some of the best sources ever because they deal with so many different people. Take them to lunch. Ask them for the scoop. Get that intel and don't be ashamed to do it. So that I think is key. And then the last thing I would share is a phrase that I love, which is called conversational threading. It's about picking up threads in conversation to keep that conversation going. So if someone says to you, how was your weekend? Give them some threads to work with. Don't just say great. You would say, actually, it was a disappointing weekend. Normally I get to hang out with my kids, but this weekend I had to work a ton. I would rather be, at the baseball diamond. Well, now that person has a few things to go off of. They know you have kids. They know you like baseball. They know you're committed to work. And then conversely, when you're listening, practicing active listening is such a critical skill, especially when it comes to making a first impression. So listen for those threads and pick up on them. And people just want to be heard. At the end of the day, you're not trying to win people over with your knowledge at first. You're trying to win people over with your humanity.
Wow. So much good there. Okay, number 3, handling challenging questions. How, especially on the fly, like how do you respond?
I think if you need a moment, own it. Again, this goes back to authenticity. If you need to pause, just say, that was a really good question. Let me think on that. Because that's also some flattery, right? And no one is ever upset at being told they asked a great question. Another way to go about it is to ask for a reframe. I think what you just asked me was this. Am I right in that? They might frame it in a way that makes you understand the question, and at the very least, it buys you some time. Another thing you can do is something that, spokespeople often do, sometimes politicians, is just pivot to what you do know. So if you're asked a question, you could say, I can't speak to that, but what that does make me think of is a past experience with this. You're not lying. You can't speak to that. But then you pivot away. And then finally, I would also say, because I'm a big believer in authenticity, if you don't know, particularly if it's something high stakes, tell them you need to get back to them. I don't think there's any shame in that. And at the very least, it proves that you're taking their question seriously.
Wow, those are really great. Okay, the last one is creating great and impactful presentations. What are some of your rules?
I used to call it the Twitter rule back when Twitter existed by name and was limited to 140 characters, but I'll still call it the Twitter rule, which is if you can't explain your big idea for a presentation in 140 characters or less, you need to go back to the drawing board. There's probably too much there. So that's the first thing. Again, I'm big on pattern interruption. So the hook at the beginning, the bow at the end, that all applies here too. And diversify your content if you can. If you're giving a presentation, don't make it just spoken word. Can you include video clips? Can you include audio clips? Can you gamify and include some gamification? And by that, I mean, it could be as simple as sort of a role play or a scenario situation. How many of you in this room would? That sort of thing. Again, listening to a speech and active listening is very, very difficult work. So the more you can break it up for your audience, the better. And the other thing I would say to think about is your deck and your slides. Yeah. Again, I go back to TED Talks. And if you ever watch TED Talks, you'll notice they have very, very little on each slide. Typically, it's one image.
Few slides and little on each slide.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. And that's sort of the gold standard because I think so often people make the mistake of including slides that duplicate their verbiage. And in fact, they should complement your verbiage because the second someone starts reading your slides, they're not really listening to what's coming out of their mouth, or at least you're not forcing them to. So that's something that I think diminishes a lot of speech is the deck. And finally, another phrase that I think about a lot is what's called the curse of expertise. And it's when you forget that others don't know as much as you do, and you actually forget what it was like to not know how much you know now. And I think so many people want to use presentations to prove how much they know. And yet, if you do that, you've lost the room. So, considering your audience and considering, could you use analogies to explain something versus acronyms or, industry jargon speak that may leave people feeling a bit clueless.
My mother used to always say that good communication is about having the other person understand you. It's not about you. It's about whether the other person understands you. And so if you're talking in jargon, to your point, and you're trying to make yourself sound so great, nobody understands you, then you're a terrible communicator. That's not something to be proud of.
And I also think it's like you want people to be able to ask about more versus trying to give them everything where they can't actually comprehend. I think that's one of the hardest things is just getting people to understand that wanting more is actually not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes, 100%. And I think what you're speaking to too is a lack of ego. This actually isn't about you. It's about the person receiving the message. And I think so often when people are in a position of speaking, they feel like they have to prove their wisdom. And in fact, I don't think that's the case. I think you want someone up there who's an excellent storyteller.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's so much to learn there. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I know something you've been fascinated about has been the difference between kind of the millennial workforce and the generation that came before. And as someone who's participating in that, I can certainly say that there's some of those nuances. And I know there has been this case where millennials get a little bit of a bad rap. Talk just a little bit about your observations. And what I'm quite interested in is this bridging the gap or changing the perception, but also if I'm a manager managing a millennial, how do I think about that in terms of my management style?
It's a great question, and it is something I'm passionate about. It comes up a lot on the show. I feel like there are so many studies these days about the way Gen X is doing things versus millennials versus Gen Z. And I was reading an article the other day, a CBC story, and they talked about how the Senate of Canada, had a webinar called Working with Millennials. And within that webinar, there was a phrase about the negative stereotypes attached to millennials, that they're entitled praise seekers who are easily distracted by technology. And I had to laugh because as a millennial, it felt a little bit offensive. And yet I guess I appreciated that they were trying to work through these negative stereotypes. To me, I think it's fascinating in that what I see is Gen Z coming in with sort of a sledgehammer to the traditional architecture of the workplace. And I think millennials are caught in this interesting place in between where there's a lot of loyalty, and the millennials I know, and from what I've read in all these studies, is millennials want to give and they want to be heard and they want to contribute, but they also really, really value trying to craft a life where they can be as ambitious about work as they are about health and family building and hobbies. And so they're willing to give you, as a manager, their best work if they feel like their work is meaningful, if they feel like there's legitimate opportunity for growth, and if they feel like they're working for a human being. And I think to your point about how you manage, I was just having coffee with another millennial today, and we were talking about how she's now working for a boss that she adores. And she was just thinking about leaving when she had a different boss. And we were talking about this idea that you don't quit a job, you quit a boss. And so I think, as far as managing millennials, it's about just that. It's about treating them as humans, especially because so many of us are at the age now where we are maybe dealing with fertility issues or have young kids and maybe caring for aging parents. That would be my sort of attempt at words of wisdom from a millennial in the workforce.
It's interesting because, what you're talking about is actually just knowing who you're working with, right? Just like you would know, I have people on my team who are introverted versus extroverted. You're saying, from a generational perspective or phase of life perspective, millennials may be in different phases, or you have to get to know them to understand what works for them. It just strikes me as kind of just knowing who you're working with.
Exactly. And it's about being a human, to your point. And one other story that I'll share that I thought was fascinating and pertinent was I did this series called Mom Life Crisis. And one of the episodes is about how motherhood impacted your career. And we had one woman on the panel who is a lawyer and has 3 children, I think, who are quite young. And she shared a story about how sometimes what workplaces celebrate reveal the things that they value. And what she said was there was a company-wide memo sent out congratulating a woman who had closed a deal as she was on the way to the hospital to give birth.
I remember that. That was so crazy, so disturbing.
Right. And she said that this email went out to articling students. So that right there tells them everything they need to know about how this place values their humanity versus how it values their contributions as an employee.
Right. And what the expectations are, which are outrageous and quite frankly offensive, that is being discussed, that's anyone's business, and that it's rewarded or admired or revered.
That's the gold standard.
Exactly. Well, this is a perfect segue, actually, because we wanted to ask you also about your 5-part series, Mom Life Crisis. I really want people to go and watch the series. What is it? Where can they find it? And what was it that made you want to do it? Because you are the mastermind behind the whole thing. You created it and produced it and orchestrated it and starred in it. So tell us a little bit about it.
Well, thank you. It was a passion project, so I'm very happy to speak about it. I went on The Social one day as a co-host, and we were talking about Lily Allen's assertion that children ruined her career. And it struck a nerve, and I was probably a little bit extra tired that day, and I just started bawling on air. And I think I'm in a unique position where The Social feels like family, so there is a comfort level there. And I just wept, and I basically said, I am feeling this right now. And the response on social media was staggering. The DMs the show was getting, the DMs I was getting, it was a lot of millennial women being like, this is me. This is how I feel. Thank you for saying this. And so I went to my boss and I said, like, we should do something with this. And she was very open. She was like, show me what you got. And so I pitched her this idea of a digital series, what became a 5-part digital series, where we just sit with Canadian women from a variety of different, we have an engineer and we have a lawyer and a teacher. We have a variety of different professions represented. And we just talked. And my only note when I was casting was I wanted women who were willing to be honest. Full stop. There's a lot of platitudes about motherhood, but we get those elsewhere. And I went through the casting process. So many women were interested. So I did screen tests and phone calls and ultimately landed on a group that I'm so proud of. Like, these women didn't do TV. And if you watch this series, they're rock stars and there's no editing. Like, what you see is what we did one time only. Because you can't reproduce tears. You can't reproduce anger. Like, again, it goes back to authenticity. And so we discuss very honestly in each episode a different aspect of how motherhood has impacted us. So our career, our identity, our relationships. We unpack this idea of the village and why it may not exist anymore. And it was such a pleasure to work on, to create. And the feedback has been remarkable, like incredible.
It really is an incredible series. I binged all of the episodes as soon as I found out about it. And, it's such a diverse group of women. There's somebody to relate to in every episode, the different ages, different ethnicity, number of kids. You can find someone to relate to. And I certainly did in different episodes. And I'm very grateful that you created that, because I think it sparks a lot of really great conversation. And it was a safe space to have those feelings and those thoughts and then discuss them. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for watching it.
Kate, we like to end our episodes with asking each of our guests about the advice they'd give their younger self. So tell us, what advice would you give younger Kate?
I would say, don't work so hard that you don't enjoy it. And that's still something I'm trying to teach myself. I'm a forward thinker, and always what's nexter, gotta be thinking ahead. And I look back now, and when I was teaching in Italy, I was so worried about what was next. And when I was professionally vacationing, instead of doing what I needed to do and then going out to enjoy the beach, I would do 5 more videos. And I really do feel like I wasted those opportunities away. And I should have been making memories while I also did great work. So I'm trying to remind myself now that while it's awesome to think 2 steps ahead, you have to combat that by also reminding yourself to, as I like to think of it, be where your feet are right now.
It's great.
It really, really resonates with me. I think it's good learning to always enjoy where you are, because you never know where you'll be in the future. So it's been absolutely a pleasure having you on. You had so many different topics to talk about, and all of them were very, very insightful, Kate. So we're thrilled to have had you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And we'll look forward to seeing not only you on the social, but what other series or shows or things that come in your future, because it's clear that you have so much to offer and so much to come. So thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you both so much. Truly, I'm such a fan of the pod. I think it's so important. I love that it's Canadian, speaking to Canadian women. So it was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. Well, I have to admit, I learned a lot during that episode. I was taking notes quite aggressively because there's a lot there.
She's incredible.
She's incredible. She's incredibly poised, very well spoken. And I think a lot of what she's sharing is something for whether you're at the beginning of your career, middle, end, whatever.
Broadcast
personal life,
business.
Yeah,
whatever.
broadcast business, wherever. There's just so much to take away. It's hard to kind of narrow it down. But I think the one thing that she said that I think transcends like your rapid fire questions was this notion of preparedness. And I think it took me a little too long to realize the value of preparedness. And it's over the past several years where I've had a couple of leaders who really preached this notion of being prepared, showing up the way you want to show up. And so whether you're writing a great speech, want to make a good first impression, like I just think there's this component of like, I have to be prepared if I'm going to show up at my best. And
don't wing it.
Don't wing it. And one of the things I love this line, your brain needs to hear your mouth speaking. And so like for a speech or, when you have to do a presentation, this notion of practicing out loud as a form of preparedness, gold, and it works.
100%.
And I love that line.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I actually do it a lot. I was actually presenting a couple of days ago and I was sitting in my office just talking out loud. I've done it for years. And in fact, I remember a really big presentation that I had to do years ago. It was like 15 years ago. And my husband still talks about it because he had never seen anybody do this. And I sat in front of the mirror and practiced that presentation for 3 hours. I was sitting on the floor in my bedroom in front of the mirror and I practiced for 3 hours. I practiced my jokes. I practiced my smile. I practiced my hand movement. And obviously everything that I was saying, because I didn't want to bring notes with me. I didn't want to read. I wanted my slides to be very thin. And the only way to do that is to be prepared. And, one of the biggest gifts that I got out of my MBA was we had to do a presentation and they recorded us. And then we had to watch ourselves. And oh my God, what a gift that was, because I saw myself doing the weirdest things. I was like slapping my hands on my thighs. I was moving all funny. I was like, and from that, and that's why I do the mirror thing. And sometimes I even record myself to watch, to check in to make sure. And I tell people on my team all the time, if you want to improve your presentation skills, you have to see yourself presenting. Yep. Otherwise, how are you going to objectively, and as much as everyone's like, it's so cringe and I hate it, it's like, well, you have to. How can you expect anybody else to watch you if you can't even watch you? And that's how you get better.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's on a speech, whether that whole notion of read the room before you get in the room to make an impression. Yeah. That's really powerful. And as I said, it took me a long time in my career, and I still have to remind myself it's not something that comes naturally to me to create the space for preparedness. And I think that's a big takeaway that I wrote down for myself out of this one.
I agree. I loved what she said around the beginning of the speech and flipping the speech on its head. I actually heard something similar once, and they said, people's interest declines during your presentation. So at the beginning, they are the most interested that they could be, and they just get less and less interested and bored, and they check out and they start to think about their grocery list and whatever. And so don't waste the peak of their interest with stupid housekeeping things.
Right.
Get in there and kind of change the trajectory of their interest with something interesting. And so I just love that she said that. There was just so many gems.
Well, I was going to say, I think even her comment on the Twitter role for a presentation, right? If you can't summarize the presentation you're going to do in 140 characters, not that your presentation is going to be 140 characters, but the fact that you can't summarize it, or you can summarize it in a short amount of time, is super important. And again, I see this across the different levels in an organization. It's not an entry level issue with creating, to your point, great presentations from the hook all the way through to be, sharing what the audience is looking for, not what you want to tell the audience, and finding a way to craft it. That her gold on presentations was very, very strong.
If you can't articulate your message succinctly, then how is anybody else supposed to figure out what it is that you're trying to say? So I think going in with that in mind is the most important, because that's the big takeaway. Oh,
well, I was going to say,
so good.
The one thing I take away from this is my ability to be on the social from 10:30 to 1. I have more respect for those hosts, and it's probably something that I would never be able to do. So
I had no idea.
All the kudos. I had no idea either, but I am impressed, and I'm going to aspire to that.
That's right. We should all have that much time to prepare and be as articulate on national television.
Exactly.
And that's amazing. No, it's really a skill, and she's incredible at it. And I'm going to do one more plug for her miniseries, Mom Life Crisis, because it really is very moving and important conversations. And I would recommend it to men and women. I think women will find it very comforting, and I'm not surprised that she got a lot of positive feedback, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think men have a lot to take from it as well. So go listen to that.
I'm halfway through, and I can't wait to finish it. So thanks, Kate, for all the goodness.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for listening to this episode of She Means Business. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and head over to our show notes where you can find helpful links and summaries of key points from the episode. We'd also love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Instagram, so please follow and DM us at the She Means Business podcast. See you next time.